I still remember the exact moment I realized everything I had built was about to be stolen from me. I was standing in the break room on the seventh floor of Whitfield and Associates, one of the most respected financial consulting firms in Birmingham, holding a lukewarm cup of tea that had gone cold in my hands without me even noticing. My phone had buzzed with a calendar notification, a meeting I had never scheduled, in a room I had never been invited to, with executives whose names I only ever saw on company-wide emails. And next to that meeting request was a note from my boss, Victoria Ashford, that simply read, "Don't come in tomorrow. Take the day. You've earned it." She had added a smiley face at the end, which at the time I thought was generous, maybe even kind. I would later learn that the smiley face was the mask she wore while she held a knife behind her back. My name is Marcus Elliott. I am 34 years old, and for the better part of 6 years, I poured every ounce of my energy, my creativity, my loyalty, and my future into a woman who I believed was my mentor, my champion, and my friend. Victoria was not just my boss. She was the person who had plucked me from obscurity, who had taken a chance on a young man from a working-class family in Wolverhampton, who had promised me that if I worked hard, if I stayed loyal, if I followed her lead, she would make sure I rose with her. And I believed her. I believed every single word. That was my first mistake. But before I tell you how she betrayed me, before I explain how the woman who once called me her protege tried to bury me beneath her ambition, I need to take you back to the beginning. I need you to understand who I was, who she was, and how something that felt like destiny turned into destruction. I joined Whitfield and Associates when I was 28 years old. I had graduated from Aston University with a degree in business finance, not from one of the prestigious schools like Oxford or Cambridge, not with connections or family money, but with determination and a hunger that came from growing up watching my mother work 3 jobs just to keep the lights on. I had spent years clawing my way up from entry-level positions at small firms, building my reputation one client at a time, one successful project after another. When I finally landed an interview at Whitfield, I knew it was my chance to break into the kind of world that people like me rarely got to enter. The interview panel consisted of 3 senior executives, all men in their 50s with gray hair and tailored suits that probably cost more than my monthly rent. They asked me the usual questions about my experience, my qualifications, my approach to client management. I answered each one carefully, professionally, knowing that I was being measured not just by my words, but by the way I carried myself, by whether I seemed like I belonged in their world. By the end of the interview, I could tell from their polite smiles that they were not impressed. I was competent, sure, but I was not remarkable. I was not one of them. And then the door opened, and Victoria Ashford walked in. She was not supposed to be part of the panel. I learned later that she had been passing by the conference room and had stopped to observe through the glass window. Something about me, she would later claim, caught her attention. She asked if she could join for the final few questions, and the men on the panel deferred to her immediately. Victoria was the head of the Strategic Accounts Division, one of the most profitable departments in the entire company. She reported directly to the CEO. Her word carried weight. She sat down across from me, crossed her legs, and studied me with eyes that seemed to see right through my carefully rehearsed answers and into the hunger beneath. She was in her early 40s then, impeccably dressed, with auburn hair styled in a way that looked effortless, but probably took an hour to achieve. She had the kind of presence that made everyone else in the room feel smaller, and yet when she smiled at me, it felt like she was letting me in on a secret that the others were not privy to. "Tell me something, Marcus," she said, her voice warm but probing. What makes you different from every other candidate who has sat in that chair this week? The men on the panel shifted uncomfortably. This was not a standard interview question, but I understood what she was really asking. She wanted to know if I had fire. She wanted to know if I was hungry enough to fight for a seat at a table that had never been set for someone like me. I leaned forward and told her the truth. I told her about my mother, about the nights I spent as a teenager helping her balance the books for her cleaning business while also studying for my exams. I told her about the first client I ever won on my own, a small manufacturing company that everyone else had written off as a lost cause, and how I had turned their finances around through sheer persistence and creative problem solving. I told her that I did not come from privilege, that I did not have connections, that I had earned every single thing I had through hard work and sacrifice. And I told her that I was not just looking for a job. I was looking for a place where I could prove that background did not determine destiny. When I finished, there was a long silence. The men on the panel exchanged uncomfortable glances. Victoria simply nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "I think we have found our candidate," she said. The other executives looked surprised, but none of them dared to contradict her. And just like that, my life changed. I was hired not as a junior analyst, as I had expected, but as a client relationship manager directly under Victoria's supervision. It was a position that typically required at least 10 years of experience. I had barely 6. But Victoria had seen something in me, and she was willing to take the risk. For the first 2 years, I worked harder than I had ever worked in my life. I arrived at the office before anyone else and left after everyone had gone home. I studied every client portfolio, memorized every market trend, and developed strategies that consistently exceeded expectations. Victoria noticed. She began including me in meetings with senior executives, introducing me to clients as her rising star. She would pull me aside after presentations and offer feedback that was always constructive, always insightful, always delivered with the warmth of someone who genuinely wanted to see me succeed. We developed a rhythm. She would identify the opportunities, and I would execute the strategies. She would handle the politics, and I would handle the details. It was a partnership that worked beautifully, and with each successful project, our department's profits grew. So did my reputation. People began to notice me. They began to respect me. And Victoria made sure everyone knew that my success was tied to her leadership. "Marcus is a reflection of what this department can achieve when we invest in talent," she would say during company meetings. "I am proud to have him on my team." I believed that she meant it. I believed that we were building something together. I believed that when the time came for her to move up, she would bring me with her. Looking back now, I can see the warning signs that I missed. I can see how every compliment was also a reminder that my success depended on her. I can see how every opportunity she gave me came with invisible strings attached. But at the time, I was blinded by gratitude. I was blinded by loyalty. I was blinded by the desperate hope that I had finally found someone who believed in me. The first crack appeared during my 3rd year at the company. We had just completed a massive project for a multinational client, securing a contract worth over £15 million. It was the biggest win our department had ever achieved, and I had been the lead strategist on the entire proposal. I had spent months developing the financial models, building relationships with the client's executives, and addressing every concern they raised. Victoria had been involved, of course, overseeing the process and providing guidance. But the work, the real work, was mine. When the contract was signed, the CEO sent out a company-wide email congratulating the team on our achievement. But in that email, he specifically thanked Victoria for her exceptional leadership and her innovative approach to securing the deal. My name was mentioned in passing, grouped with several other team members who had played minor roles. I was disappointed, but I told myself it was just politics. Victoria was the department head. It made sense that she would receive the primary credit. And besides, she had always been generous with her praise of me in private. Surely she would correct the record when the time was right. I waited. Days passed, then weeks. The correction never came. Instead, Victoria accepted the praise graciously, giving interviews to industry publications about her leadership philosophy and her vision for the company's future. She never mentioned me. Not once. I tried to bring it up with her during one of our weekly one-on-one meetings. I was careful to frame it diplomatically, expressing my gratitude for the opportunity while gently pointing out that the email had perhaps understated my contribution. Victoria listened with the same warm smile she always wore, nodding sympathetically. "Marcus, I understand how you feel," she said. "And trust me, I know exactly how much work you put in. But you have to understand how this game works. The executives upstairs, they respond to leadership narratives. They want to see that there's someone in charge who can deliver results. If I start splitting credit with every team member, it dilutes the message. It makes me look weak. And if I look weak, our entire department suffers." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Right now, the board is considering creating a new executive position, Vice President of Strategic Growth. It is essentially a stepping stone to the C-suite. I am the front runner, and when I get that promotion, I am going to need someone I trust to take over this department. Someone who has proven their loyalty. Someone who has earned it." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "That person is you, Marcus. But you have to be patient. You have to trust me. Can you do that?" I looked into her eyes, and I saw sincerity. I saw warmth. I saw a future that she was promising to share with me. And so I nodded. I told her I understood. I told her I trusted her. I wish I could go back to that moment and shake myself. I wish I could tell the man I was then that trust is not something you give away freely. It is something that must be earned through consistent action, not just words. But I was young, and I was hopeful, and I wanted so badly to believe that I had found someone who truly had my best interests at heart. For the next 2 years, I continued to work with the same dedication. Victoria's bid for the vice president position was delayed due to internal restructuring, but she assured me that it was still in progress. Meanwhile, I kept producing results. I brought in new clients, developed innovative strategies, and trained junior analysts who went on to become valuable members of our team. With each success, Victoria's praise grew louder in private, but remained noticeably absent in public. I began to keep track, marking in a notebook every time my work was attributed solely to her leadership. The list grew longer. The pattern became undeniable. But I convinced myself that it was temporary. I convinced myself that once Victoria got her promotion, everything would change. She would give me my due credit. She would recommend me for her position. She would keep her promise. The day I finally understood the truth was the day I discovered the meeting. It was a Thursday afternoon, and I had been working late to finish a client presentation. Most of the office had already gone home, and the building was quiet except for the hum of the air conditioning. I was on my way to the supply room to grab some printing paper when I passed by the small conference room on the executive floor. The door was slightly ajar, and I could hear voices inside. Normally, I would have walked past without a second thought. But something made me pause. I heard my name. I pressed myself against the wall, my heart suddenly pounding, and listened. "Marcus has been invaluable, of course," Victoria was saying, "but he is not ready for a leadership role. He lacks the strategic vision. He is excellent at execution, but he needs someone to guide him. He always has. Another voice, one I recognized as belonging to Gregory Hastings, the chief operations officer, responded. But his track record speaks for itself. The Meridian contract, the Fulton merger, the Patterson acquisition. Those were all his projects, were they not? They were our projects, Victoria said smoothly. I developed the strategies, and Marcus implemented them. He is a capable pair of hands, but he is not a leader. Not yet. Perhaps in a few more years, with the right mentoring, he might be ready for a senior analyst position. But department head? That would be setting him up to fail. I felt something cold settle in my chest. I had suspected, somewhere deep down, that Victoria was not as supportive as she appeared. But hearing her dismiss years of my work so casually, so confidently, was like being punched in the stomach. What about the recognition issue? Gregory continued. There have been some murmurs that the credit for those projects was not distributed equitably. Victoria laughed, the sound light and dismissive. Marcus is sensitive. He comes from a different background, and sometimes he struggles to understand how corporate culture works. I have been patient with him, mentoring him, helping him navigate these waters, but he has a chip on his shoulder. He sees slights where none exist. If anything, I have been overly generous in shielding him from his own shortcomings. I clenched my fists so hard that my nails dug into my palms. She was not just stealing my credit. She was actively undermining my reputation to the people who controlled my future. Very well, Gregory said. I will note your assessment in my report. The board meets next week to finalize the vice president appointment. I assume you are prepared? Absolutely, Victoria said. I have been preparing for this moment for years. I heard the sound of chairs scraping against the floor, and I quickly retreated down the corridor before anyone could see me. My mind was racing, my heart pounding with a mixture of anger and disbelief. For 6 years, I had given everything to this woman. For 6 years, I had believed her promises, trusted her guidance, and sacrificed my own advancement for what I thought was a partnership. And all along, she had been using me as a stepping stone, taking credit for my work, while simultaneously painting me as incompetent behind closed doors. I spent that night in my flat, staring at the ceiling and trying to process what I had heard. Part of me wanted to believe that I had misunderstood, that Victoria's words had been taken out of context. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that the signs had been there all along. I had just refused to see them. The next morning, I arrived at the office determined to confront Victoria directly. I wanted to give her a chance to explain, to offer some justification that would make sense of everything. I still wanted to believe that the woman I had trusted for so long was not the person I had heard in that conference room. But when I reached her office, I found her standing at the window, looking out over the city with a phone pressed to her ear. She turned when she heard me enter, and for a moment, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Was it guilt? Concern? But it was gone so quickly that I could not be sure. Marcus, perfect timing, she said brightly, ending her call. I was just about to come find you. I have some exciting news. She gestured for me to sit, and I complied, keeping my expression neutral, even as my stomach churned with unease. I cannot share all the details yet, she continued, but things are moving forward with the vice president position. The board is meeting next week, and I have it on good authority that I am the leading candidate. If everything goes according to plan, I will be announcing my new role by the end of the month. She paused, her smile widening. And that means the department head position will be opening up. You know I have always had you in mind for that role, Marcus. This is your moment. I stared at her, searching her face for any sign of the dismissiveness I had heard the night before. But all I saw was warmth, sincerity, the same supportive mentor I had always believed her to be. "I appreciate that, Victoria," I said carefully. "But I wanted to ask you something. The presentation I did for the Meridian contract, the one that secured the deal. When the credit was assigned, my name was barely mentioned. I know you said it was about optics, but I am starting to wonder if there is more to it." Victoria's smile did not waver, but something hardened behind her eyes. "Marcus, we have discussed this before. I know it can be frustrating when you do not receive the recognition you feel you deserve, but you have to trust the process. The people who matter know your contributions. That is what is important." "Do they?" I pressed, because I overheard something yesterday that suggested otherwise. For a fraction of a second, Victoria's composure slipped. Her eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly, and I saw her reassessing me, recalculating. But she recovered quickly, her smile returning with practiced ease. "I am not sure what you think you heard, but I can assure you that I have always been your biggest advocate. I have defended you in meetings where others questioned your readiness. I have fought for your opportunities when others wanted to overlook you. If you are feeling insecure about your position, perhaps we should schedule some time to talk through your career development plan." She was gaslighting me. I could see it clearly now, the way she twisted my concerns into evidence of my own inadequacy, the way she positioned herself as my protector while simultaneously undermining me behind closed doors. And yet, even as I recognized the manipulation, I could not quite bring myself to call her out directly. Not yet. I needed proof. I needed to understand the full extent of what she had done before I made any moves. "You are right," I said, forcing a smile that felt like a mask. "I have just been stressed lately. Thank you for the reassurance." Victoria nodded, satisfied. "That is what I am here for. Now, I have a conference call in 10 minutes, but let us have lunch later this week. We can celebrate the upcoming changes." I agreed and left her office, my mind already working on a plan. If Victoria wanted to play games, I would learn the rules better than she ever could, and then I would use them to expose her. Over the following weeks, I became a different person. On the surface, I continued to be the loyal, hard-working Marcus that everyone expected. I completed my projects on time, attended meetings with my usual professionalism, and maintained my friendly rapport with colleagues. But beneath that surface, I was watching, listening, documenting. I began keeping a detailed record of every project I worked on, including drafts, emails, and meeting notes that proved my involvement. I saved copies of my original proposals before Victoria had a chance to edit them and add her name as the primary author. I started noting the dates and times of meetings where my contributions were discussed, comparing them to the official minutes that Victoria submitted to senior leadership. What I found was damning. Time and time again, my work had been repackaged and presented as Victoria's own. Strategies I had developed independently were credited to her leadership. Problems I had solved were described as challenges that she had overcome through her guidance. And in almost every case, the official documentation had been altered to minimize my role while maximizing hers. I also began paying closer attention to Victoria's relationships with other team members. I noticed that I was not the only one whose work she had appropriated. There was James, a junior analyst whose market research had been presented to the board under Victoria's name. There was Priya, whose client acquisition strategy had earned Victoria a commendation from the CEO without any mention of its true origin. And there was Rebecca, a senior consultant, who had left the company abruptly 2 years earlier, whom I now suspected had discovered what I was discovering, and had been pushed out before she could expose the truth. But even with all this evidence, I knew I could not simply walk into the CEO's office and present my findings. Victoria had spent years cultivating relationships with the senior leadership, She was trusted, respected, and her word carried far more weight than mine. If I accused her without ironclad proof, she would turn the tables on me. She would paint me as a disgruntled employee, bitter about being passed over, seeking to undermine a successful woman out of jealousy. I had seen her do it before, and I knew she would not hesitate to do it again. I needed an ally, someone who could corroborate my claims and who had enough standing in the company to be taken seriously. And I knew exactly who that person was. His name was David Chen, and he was the head of internal compliance. He was a quiet, meticulous man in his mid-50s who had spent over 20 years at Whitfield and Associates. He was known for his integrity and his unwavering commitment to ethical business practices. If anyone would be willing to investigate my claims fairly, it would be him. I approached David carefully, requesting a meeting under the pretense of discussing compliance protocols for a new client project. Once we were alone in his office, I closed the door and told him everything. David listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "What you are describing is serious," he said finally. "If true, it would constitute fraud, violation of company ethics policies, and potentially breach of contract with our clients who were misled about who developed their strategies." "I know," I said. "That is why I came to you. I have documentation, but I need someone to verify it independently. Someone who cannot be accused of having a personal agenda." David nodded slowly. "I appreciate you bringing this to me, Marcus, but I need to be honest with you. Victoria has powerful friends on the board. If we move forward with an investigation and it does not produce concrete results, there will be consequences, for both of us." "I understand the risk," I said, "but I cannot stand by and watch her take credit for the work of everyone in this department while undermining us behind our backs. It is not just about me. It is about everyone she has used and discarded." David studied me for a long moment, and I could see him weighing the options. Finally, he nodded. "Give me a week," he said. "I will review your documentation and conduct some preliminary inquiries. If I find evidence that supports your claims, we will proceed. But you need to be prepared for the possibility that this could get ugly." "I am prepared," I said, and I meant it. The week that followed was one of the longest of my life. I continued to go through the motions at work, maintaining my facade of normalcy while constantly checking my phone for updates from David. Victoria seemed oblivious to my machinations, continuing to treat me with the same patronizing warmth she always had. She even invited me to a dinner party at her home that weekend, an invitation I accepted because I knew it would give me a chance to learn more about her life outside the office. The dinner party was held at Victoria's townhouse in Edgbaston, an upscale neighborhood where the homes cost more than I would earn in a decade. The guests were a mix of Whitfield executives, local business leaders, and a few people I did not recognize. And among them, always at Victoria's side, was her husband. I had heard about Daniel Ashford, of course. Everyone at the company knew that Victoria was married to a police officer, a detective inspector with the West Midlands Police. She mentioned him frequently, usually in the context of how supportive he was of her career, how understanding he was of the long hours she worked. I had never met him before, and I was curious to see what kind of man had married the woman who was slowly destroying my life. What I found surprised me. Daniel was not at all what I expected. Where Victoria was polished and calculating, Daniel was warm and genuine. He greeted every guest with the same friendly enthusiasm, regardless of their status or importance. He laughed easily, told self-deprecating jokes, and seemed genuinely interested in the people around him. When I introduced myself, he shook my hand firmly and told me that Victoria spoke highly of me. "You are the one who saved the Meridian account, right?" he said. Victoria was telling me about how you handled that crisis. Impressive work. I felt a jolt of surprise. Victoria had told her husband about my contribution? That did not match the narrative she was pushing at the office. I filed that observation away for later analysis. Throughout the evening, I watched Daniel carefully. He moved through the party with ease, charming guests, and keeping the conversation flowing. But I also noticed the way he looked at Victoria when she was not watching. There was something there, a flicker of something that was not quite adoration. It was more like observation, assessment, the kind of careful attention that a detective would pay to a suspect. At one point, I found myself standing near the bar when Daniel approached to refill his drink. We struck up a conversation about nothing in particular: football, the weather, the challenges of work-life balance. But as we talked, I sensed that he was studying me with the same intensity I was studying him. "Marcus," he said suddenly, his voice lowering so that only I could hear. "Can I ask you something? Off the record?" I felt my pulse quicken. "Of course." "In your experience working with Victoria, has she ever taken credit for something that was not entirely hers?" The question caught me off guard. I stared at him, searching his face for any sign of a trap, but all I saw was genuine curiosity mixed with something that might have been concern. "Why do you ask?" Daniel sighed, glancing across the room to where Victoria was holding court with a group of executives. "Let us just say that I have noticed some inconsistencies. Things she has told me that do not quite match up with what I have heard from other sources. I am trained to spot lies, Marcus. It is literally my job. And lately, I have been seeing a lot of them." I felt a strange kinship with this man, this stranger who was married to my nemesis. He was beginning to see what I had seen, and he was not afraid to acknowledge it. "I cannot discuss specifics," I said carefully. "Not yet. But I can tell you that your instincts are probably correct." Daniel nodded slowly, his expression grim. "I was afraid of that." He paused, seeming to debate something internally. "If there is anything you need, any help at all, let me know. Victoria may be my wife, but I took an oath to uphold the truth. That oath does not have an exception for family." He handed me a business card with his personal contact information, and I slipped it into my pocket. We rejoined the party as if nothing had happened, but I knew that something significant had just occurred. I had found an unexpected ally, and he was closer to Victoria than anyone else. 2 days later, David Chen called me into his office. His expression was serious, and I could tell from the stack of folders on his desk that he had been doing more than just reviewing my documentation. "Sit down, Marcus," he said. "We need to talk." I sat, my heart pounding with anticipation. "What did you find?" David pushed a folder across the desk toward me. "Everything you claimed and more. I conducted interviews with several current and former employees, all of whom corroborated your account. James, Priya, and 2 others have agreed to provide written statements. I also obtained email records that show Victoria systematically altered project documentation to minimize the contributions of her team members while inflating her own." I felt a rush of vindication, but David held up a hand. "There is more, and this is where it gets complicated." He opened another folder, revealing a series of financial documents. "In the course of my investigation, I discovered irregularities in the department's expense reports. Victoria has been claiming reimbursements for client entertainment that never occurred. She has also been invoicing for consulting services from a company that, as far as I can tell, does not actually exist." I stared at the documents, struggling to process what I was seeing. "Are you saying she has been embezzling?" "I am saying there is evidence that suggests financial impropriety," David said carefully. This goes beyond ethics violations, Marcus. This is potentially criminal, and that means we need to involve external authorities. I thought of Daniel, of the business card sitting in my pocket. I might know someone who can help. That night, I called Daniel Ashford. I told him everything, not just about the credit theft, but about the financial irregularities David had discovered. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and I could almost hear the gears turning in his mind. "You understand what you are asking me to do," he said finally. "You are asking me to investigate my own wife." "I am asking you to investigate a crime," I corrected. "The fact that your wife happens to be involved is incidental." Another long pause. Then, "Send me the documents. I will review them personally." Over the following weeks, a carefully coordinated investigation began to take shape. David continued his internal compliance review, building an airtight case of ethics violations, while I provided all the documentation I had gathered. Meanwhile, Daniel quietly opened an inquiry into the financial irregularities, cross-referencing Victoria's expense claims with actual bank records and company invoices. Throughout this period, I maintained my facade at work. I attended meetings, completed projects, and continued to act like the loyal subordinate Victoria believed me to be. But it was becoming increasingly difficult to hide my contempt. Every time she praised me in private while undermining me in public, every time she took credit for work that was not hers, I had to remind myself that patience was essential. The trap was being set, and I could not afford to spring it prematurely. The breaking point came faster than I expected. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I had just returned from a client meeting when Victoria called me into her office. She was standing by the window, her back to me, and there was a tension in her posture that I had never seen before. "Close the door, Marcus," she said without turning around. I complied, suddenly wary. "Is everything all right?" "No," she said, finally facing me. Her expression was cold, all traces of her usual warmth gone. "No, everything is not all right. Someone has been making inquiries about my department. Compliance has been interviewing staff, asking questions about project attribution and expense reports. Do you know anything about this?" I kept my face neutral. "I am not sure what you mean. Do not play games with me." Her voice was sharp, cutting. "I know it was you. I know you went to David Chen. What I do not know is why. I have given you everything, Marcus. I have protected you, promoted you, defended you when others said you were not ready. And this is how you repay me?" I felt something snap inside me, the last thread of restraint finally breaking. "Protected me? You have been stealing my work for 6 years. You have been undermining me to the executives while pretending to be my champion. You have used me, just like you have used everyone in this department. The only person you have ever protected is yourself." Victoria's eyes widened, and for a moment I saw genuine surprise beneath her anger. She had not expected me to fight back. She had underestimated me, just as she had underestimated everyone she had used and discarded. "You ungrateful little—" She caught herself, visibly struggling to regain composure. "You have no idea what you have started, Marcus. I have friends on the board. I have connections you cannot even imagine. By the time I am finished with you, you will not be able to get a job emptying bins in this city." "Is that a threat?" I asked calmly. "It is a promise." I nodded slowly, as if considering her words. Then I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. "You might want to reconsider that promise, Victoria, because you are not the only one with connections." I showed her the screen where a text message from Daniel was displayed. It read simply, "Case file complete. Submitting to Financial Crimes Unit tomorrow." Victoria's face went pale. "Daniel?" What does Daniel have to do with this? He is a detective inspector, I said. It is his job to investigate crimes, and apparently you have committed quite a few. For the first time since I had known her, Victoria was speechless. She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, all her carefully constructed composure crumbling before my eyes. You can try to destroy me, I continued, but I think you are going to be too busy dealing with the consequences of your own actions. The ethics violations alone will end your career. The financial irregularities might end your freedom. I turned and walked toward the door, then paused with my hand on the handle. Oh, and Victoria? That vice president position you have been chasing? I heard the board decided to table it indefinitely. Apparently they got wind of some troubling information about the leading candidate. What a shame. I left her standing there, her world collapsing around her, and I felt something I had not felt in years. I felt free. The weeks that followed were chaotic, but in the best possible way. David Chen's compliance report was submitted to the board, documenting years of ethics violations, including falsified attribution, manipulation of records, and systematic harassment of employees who threatened to expose the truth. The board convened an emergency session, and Victoria was immediately placed on administrative leave, pending a full investigation. But the real blow came from an unexpected direction. Daniel Ashford, true to his word, had submitted his findings to the Financial Crimes Unit of the West Midlands Police. The investigation revealed that Victoria had embezzled over £300,000 through a combination of fraudulent expense claims and phantom invoicing. The shell company she had been billing for consulting services was traced back to a bank account in her mother's name, a desperate attempt to hide the money trail that ultimately failed. Victoria was arrested at her home on a Thursday morning, handcuffed in her own driveway while her neighbors watched from behind their curtains. The news spread through the company like wildfire, and by lunchtime, every employee at Whitfield & Associates knew that their respected department head was being charged with fraud, embezzlement, and falsification of records. I learned later that Daniel had filed for divorce on the same day as the arrest. When I asked him about it, he simply said that he had taken an oath to uphold the truth, and he could not remain married to someone who had built their entire life on lies. The trial took place 6 months later. I was called as a witness, along with James, Priya, and half a dozen other former employees who had been victimized by Victoria's schemes. We testified about the systematic theft of our work, the manipulation, the gaslighting, the way she had built her career on the backs of people she considered disposable. Victoria's defense team tried to paint us as disgruntled employees seeking revenge, but the documentation was too comprehensive to dismiss. Email after email, memo after memo, the paper trail told a story of calculated exploitation that spanned nearly a decade. The financial evidence was equally damning. Bank records and invoices that showed a clear pattern of fraud extending back to before I had even joined the company. In the end, Victoria was convicted on all counts. She was sentenced to 4 years in prison for embezzlement and fraud, with an additional 2 years suspended for the ethics violations. Her assets were seized to repay the money she had stolen, and she was permanently barred from working in financial services. But the most satisfying moment came not in the courtroom, but in the weeks that followed. With Victoria gone, the board needed to find a new head for the Strategic Accounts Division. They reviewed the performance records, the client feedback, the project outcomes, and when they traced back the success of the department over the past 6 years, one name kept appearing again and again. I was offered the position of department head, along with a formal apology from the CEO for the way my contributions had been overlooked. It was not quite the validation I had hoped for. Receiving recognition that should have been given freely without the trauma that preceded it. But it was something. It was proof that the truth eventually wins out. There were other changes, too. James was promoted to senior analyst. Priya was given leadership of her own team. The culture of the department shifted, becoming more collaborative, more transparent, more willing to acknowledge the work of everyone who contributed. I made it my mission to ensure that no one else would ever experience what I had experienced, that credit would be given where it was earned, and that ambition would never again be allowed to eclipse integrity. As for Daniel, we became unlikely friends. He had lost his marriage, his home, and the future he had envisioned. But he had gained something too, the knowledge that he had done the right thing, even when it was difficult. We would meet for coffee occasionally, two men bound by a shared experience of betrayal and a shared commitment to truth. "I should have seen it sooner," he told me once. "The signs were there, but I did not want to look. I think part of me knew, deep down, but I convinced myself that I was imagining things." "We all did," I said. "That is how people like Victoria operate. They make you doubt your own perception until you do not know what is real anymore." He nodded slowly. "Well, not anymore. Never again." A year after Victoria's conviction, I received a letter. It had been forwarded through the company's legal department, and when I opened it, I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was from Victoria. The letter was long, rambling in places, clearly written by someone who was still struggling to accept responsibility for their actions. She blamed me, blamed Daniel, blamed the company, blamed everyone except herself. But buried in the accusations and self-pity was something that surprised me. An admission. "I knew what I was doing was wrong," she wrote. "I knew I was taking what did not belong to me. But I told myself it was necessary, that the ends justified the means, that you and the others were just stepping stones on my path to something greater. I convinced myself that I deserved what I was taking because I had worked so hard to get where I was." She paused, and I could almost see her struggling with the next words. I was wrong, not just tactically, but fundamentally. I built my entire career on a foundation of lies, and when that foundation crumbled, everything came down with it. I lost my job, my freedom, my marriage, my reputation. I lost everything that mattered to me. And the worst part is, I cannot even say I did not deserve it. I did. Every consequence that followed was a direct result of choices I made. Choices I convinced myself were justified, but which I always knew, somewhere deep down, were wrong. The letter ended with a request. Would I be willing to write a letter of support for her parole hearing? She was not asking for forgiveness, she said. She just wanted a chance to start over. I thought about that request for a long time. Part of me wanted to refuse, to let her experience the full weight of the consequences she had earned. But another part of me, the part that had spent the last year trying to build a department based on second chances and redemption, could not quite dismiss her plea. In the end, I did not write a letter of support, but I did not write a letter of opposition either. I simply replied with a single sentence. The only person who can give you a second chance is yourself. Whether you take it is up to you. I never heard from Victoria again after that. I do not know if she was granted parole, if she rebuilt her life, if she found the redemption she was seeking. That part of her story is not mine to tell. What I can tell you is my own story. The story of a young man who came from nothing, who dared to believe in someone who did not deserve that belief, who was betrayed by the person he trusted most, and who found the strength to fight back. Not through violence or vengeance, but through truth, through documentation, through the slow, steady accumulation of evidence that exposed the lies for what they were. I am still the head of the Strategic Accounts Division at Whitfield and Associates. We have grown significantly since Victoria's departure, bringing in new clients and new talent. But more importantly, we have built something that she never could: a culture of genuine trust and mutual respect. Every new employee I hire, I tell them the same thing. Your work matters. Your contributions will be acknowledged. And if anyone ever tries to take credit for what you have built, come to me. We will handle it together. It is not much, perhaps, just words. But words, backed by action, can change everything. They can expose lies. They can reveal truth. They can transform a victim into a victor, and a betrayer into a cautionary tale. I used to believe that success required a champion, someone powerful who would lift you up and carry you forward. Now I know better. The only champion you truly need is yourself. Your integrity, your determination, your unwillingness to be silenced when you know you are right. Victoria taught me many things during the years I worked for her. She taught me about strategy, about client management, about the politics of corporate advancement. But the most important lesson she taught me was entirely unintentional. She taught me that the truth, no matter how long it takes, always finds a way to surface. And when it does, no amount of manipulation, no web of lies, no carefully constructed facade can withstand its power. Sometimes I think about the day I stood in that break room, holding a cold cup of tea, reading a calendar notification for a meeting I was never meant to see. I think about how close I came to accepting the narrative that Victoria was constructing, to believing that I was simply not good enough, not ready, not worthy of the recognition I had earned. And then I think about where I am now, about the team I have built, about the respect I have earned, about the life I have created on a foundation of truth rather than lies. It was not an easy journey. There were moments when I doubted myself, when I wondered if I was making the right choice, when the weight of the battle threatened to crush me. But I kept going. I kept fighting. I kept believing that the truth would prevail. And in the end, it did. That is my story. It is not a story of perfect victory or uncomplicated justice. It is a story of struggle, of doubt, of the long and difficult process of exposing the truth when powerful forces are arrayed against you. But it is also a story of hope, a story of resilience, a story of the incredible power that comes from refusing to be silenced. If you are going through something similar, if someone is stealing your work, or undermining your reputation, or making you feel like you do not deserve the success you have earned, I want you to know something. You are not alone, and you are not powerless. Document everything. Find allies who share your commitment to truth. Be patient, be strategic, and never stop believing in your own worth. The betrayer may have the upper hand now, but truth has a way of evening the score. And when it does, no amount of power or influence can protect those who have built their lives on lies. I know this because I lived it, and I am standing here today, not as a victim, but as proof that justice, however long it takes, is always possible. Victoria Ashford bet everything on the assumption that I would never fight back, that I would accept my role as a stepping stone and fade quietly into obscurity. She was wrong, and in the end, that miscalculation cost her everything. Some might call it karma, some might call it justice. I prefer to think of it simply as truth doing what truth always does, rising to the surface, no matter how deep someone tries to bury it. My name is Marcus Elliott. I was betrayed by someone I trusted with my career, my loyalty, and my future. And I fought back. Not with anger, not with violence, but with the most powerful weapon any of us have: the truth. It took years. It cost me friendships, sleep, and more stress than I care to remember. But when the dust settled, I was still standing. And Victoria, for all her power and connections and carefully constructed lies, was not. That is the lesson I carry with me every day. That is the lesson I want to leave with you. The truth is powerful. The truth is patient. And the truth, in the end, always wins.